What is up, and welcome to another episode of the Progress Podcast. Really delighted to have you here with us today. I'm joined by Kylee Shields.
Hi, welcome.
Thanks for being on the podcast. This is the place where you can come to learn that you do have a purpose and progress is possible for you and your life wherever you're at. And Kylee, she really has some valuable insights to share with us today. She's a person who's made a lot of progress, has a lot of expertise, particularly in the areas of mental health. And so I'm excited to dive into some questions with her today. And actually, this is not usually the way I start with my guests, but I want to share a story with you.
Yeah.
Because I think that you'll really enjoy this after listening to your podcast and some of the work that you've done. Kylee hosts a podcast called The Belonging Place, and I highly recommend it to each of you. But I had an experience at a summer camp. It was a summer camp for substance abuse prevention. It's called Idaho Youth Summit.
Okay.
It's up in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho.
Okay.
So
Love Coeur d'Alene.
gorgeous, beautiful.
Woo, yeah.
It's up by a lake, and there's no cell service, so folks are present. And they bring in a bunch of students, some of which are, the classic, involved in every extracurricular, doing everything. But they also offer scholarships to students who usually wouldn't get an opportunity like that. And I went to this camp for the first time feeling like I knew who I was, feeling like I was comfortable with myself. And my whole perception of myself was blown out of the water. Yeah. And I had such breakthroughs and such deep connection with myself, discovering who I was, connection with other people. I came back the next year as staff. It was just such a beautiful place, and one of the things that happened at the camp that I realized is that folks felt comfortable enough to share the unspeakables. Okay. They would share things that usually folks just don't feel comfortable sharing, and I know that's a topic you have a lot of passion about. What is the effect when we share our unspeakables, Kylee?
Yeah, first of all, I want to say, I love that you use this term. Mm-hmm. Did you borrow this from Heare?
From you,
okay, because I was like, if he says that on his own, that's wild. And I'm sure there's other people, but early on as a therapist, even before I was a therapist, this is what I called them my unspeakable things, or people's unspeakable things. And I got this, I'm just going to tell you also a quick story about this. I was asked to be a therapist on a Native American reservation camp. It's called Port-au-Pines. It's down in San Carlos in Arizona. And this was in between this was the summer between my first and second year of grad school. So I wasn't a fully licensed therapist. I was under another therapist license. So you can imagine, I got thrown in, and I won't go into all the details about being on a reservation, but I love the Native American people. I grew up in a home where my father loved Native American culture and stuff, but being on the reservation as a female and as a therapist and being white, I already had like 3 strikes against me, right? So I was trying to be really creative. I was working with kids ages like 10 to 15. Most of them had significant loss and grief, and most of them had uncles or fathers who had committed suicide, and most of them through hanging. And alcoholism, and many of the kids that were coming into our camp were already alcoholics, considered at the ages of 10, 11, and 12, which is wild, right? So I'm trying to teach them about loss, and I'm trying to teach them about grief, and they all have what we call complicated grief. So you have death, and you have addiction, and you have families, and you have some kids were sleeping on the porch in their homes because they didn't have enough beds, so you got some poverty, right? And it's really hard for kids who don't have developed brains to understand how to process this. And so one day I was standing by our food pantry because there's nothing out in the middle. We had to have a water buffalo for our water, and we had to sort of have, so I go to our place where we have some food, right? And I see this bag of marshmallows, and I think, Fluffy Bunny. Have you heard this thing when you're a kid and you stick all the...
Oh, yeah, yes.
Okay. And I was like, we can do Fluffy Bunny, but we can do it with grief or complicated grief. So the idea of Fluffy Bunny that everyone's had is how many marshmallows can you put in your mouth and still say Fluffy Bunny? Well, I took this concept. I feel like this was probably given to me inspirationally. And I had all the kids, play this game, and it was a fun game. How many, and then at a certain point your mouth is full and you have to right? And however you do that is however they did that. Some kids were like spitting in their hands. Some kids are like, this is where that term, getting rid of my unspeakable things, the things that you're stuffed down inside of you and that need to come out, But like, it's uncomfortable. It's like, I filled myself to the brim. It's not how we should operate, right? Like, we should be able to operate where we have certain people that we trust and certain people that we can give our stuff to, and people that can carry it along the way, so that we don't have to like, but this idea of like pulling things out one by one and recognizing that like, you can't just address all of your trauma here. There's like little T trauma and big T trauma all stuck together, and you have to be able to figure that out, right? And so for me, the gift that somebody gives when you're able to think about that, just think about all those kids in that scene. It's less about the person saying the unspeakable thing. Is it hard for them? Yes. Are they almost compelled when they feel safe because they haven't felt that? It's about how you perceive them. It's creating a safe space. It's sort of like trying your best to not react in like a crazy way if they say something crazy, or like if they think they're crazy and they say the thing and you're just kind of like, and it's a little bit like, and that's the worst thing. That's, you know what I mean? Most people's unspeakable things aren't really, and I don't want to take away from people's trauma or from people's like, but what they think is their most unspeakable thing might be much more common and much more relatable to people than they know. And the second that you speak it out and someone can validate it, recognize it, hold it, normalize it, these are all different things you can do, right? Then you feel seen, then you feel heard, then you feel like you matter, then you have permission to like, whatever you need, do more, The next step is so important. If this person needs to fix me, we've ruined it.
Yeah.
If this person can do those things I just said, they gift me permission to not be seen as fragile or broken. If you can just like, gosh, that's gotta be hard, or like, I don't know if you know this about me, but I also, like, if they can actually empathize or, not sympathize, but this person that then says their thing can show up, like, let go of whatever, the shame, there's things that we carry, there's thoughts that are, like, not true, right? That we carry with those unspeakable things. And we just get to shed those when we feel safe and someone gets to sit next to us. So I think we get to do a lot more of like heart-to-heart talking when we get to speak our unspeakable things. Yeah.
I love the emphasis you place upon the response to those unspeakable things, because sharing unspeakable things on its own is not the magic.
No,
if you share unspeakable things in an environment where folks are not educated in how to receive those, then actually you're probably going to feel a lot of barriers before you share those again.
Oh, yeah.
So you have to make sure you receive them in a way that folks can feel comfortable. And
I kind of describe it sometimes as like antennas, like on a snail, or if you think of a turtle, like if I extend my seeking antenna to like feel out and smell and I tell you some things and you're safe, I might stick my neck out a little bit more. But the second you aren't safe and you poke, like that ability to do that again, it's a lot. Like there's a lot of damage before that person's going to do that again. If I can do that with you and it goes okay, it's a lot sooner that I can probably do it with another person.
Yeah.
Each person you have to test, right? But the gift we give people, generally speaking, is to create safe places where more people can stick their neck out and they don't get their heads cut off,
Yes, yeah, belonging places.
Yes.
Yeah, along with hosting the Belonging Place podcast, Kylee, you have a lot of experience as a social worker and working as a therapist, and it sounds like you really had quite the environment to be broken in, working on the Native reservation. For a project at work, I was looking at some of the statistics, and really the Native American population is disproportionately affected by suicide and by substance abuse. It's such a difficult problem. And I want to touch on something else that you've been sharing about. This weekend I was at a beard contest. Actually.
Okay, I saw that you were like like judge,
right? I was a judge
okay.
for a beard contest for Hope for Utah.
Okay.
And we were the benefactor of this Bearded Villains like biker gang. They had this beard contest to benefit suicide prevention.
Okay.
And I loved the example that they set of being vulnerable, maybe sticking the neck and the antennas out publicly to share about mental health. It is something that all of us need to talk about and be experiencing. And when a 300-pound, 6'5", biker with a beard can do that,
Yeah.
then think about the effect that has for young people, young boys especially.
Very permission giving.
Yes,
Yeah.
I love that idea. You've also touched on some of these ideas of identity. Working as a social worker, what are some of the things that you've learned about the influence of identity in our lives?
Yeah, it's so interesting. I don't know. There's things that you can kind of think about in mental health world when you're a new therapist, and you can kind of be like, this might be true, and you can kind of have some training. And then there's things that you just can't see until, I'm 16 plus years into being a therapist. So, and I specialize in, I think it's important to the conversation, like teens.
Yeah.
So there are only so many things that teens have problems with. Now, every individual teen is unique, but what I started learning really quickly was that they are all much more similar than they are different in as far as things that were coming to the table. So things that they thought that were crazy, things that they thought that were, on a scale of 0 to 10, I think I might be a porn addict, and no, let me normalize that for you. On the scale of 100 people that I've met with, you're on a 7,
Sure.
a 100, or maybe you are like closer to a 9 out of a 10. And so let's talk about it. But like this ability. But one of the things that I can almost go back and say, every single client of mine, and I would also say their parents, though they weren't my client. I did family therapy. Had in common was a struggle with their identity. There wasn't a client I had. So the interesting thing for me is that you learn really quickly as a therapist, no matter what kind of therapy you're doing or what kind of modality or what kind of place you work for, right? I guess you could say lucked out, as my whole career up until recently has been in residential. And so when you do residential, you do all. You're doing trauma, you're doing addiction, you're doing, you name it. You're doing depression, you're doing anxiety, OCD, you're doing attachment. People ask me what I specialize in for years, and I'm like, I specialize in teens. They're like, no, but what do you do? I was like, that's what I do.
Yeah.
Because I do it all, right? So, but the thing that was the common thread is every kid, when I would meet them, they would think that the reason why they're coming to therapy is the presenting problem, right? Whatever it was. Behavioral thing. Yeah. So if it's drugs, if they're hitting walls, why are they coming to residential? And my job as a therapist was not to get stuck on the presenting problem. It was to find the root issue. So if you think about a tree, it's like, don't get stuck in the branches. Because if you lop off the branches, but you don't get the root issue, they grow back on. And sometimes they grow back on funky, meaning you stop this problem, but the problem pops out somewhere else, right? So when I, as the years would go by and I would continue in social work, we call it PI, person and environment. When we meet them and we measure them individually, like where they are in their environment, what the root issue is, like it never was not identity. But they would say it like this. They would say, Kylee, I want to better feel self-love. I don't have good self-esteem. My value, they couldn't even say it like this, but in essence, my values don't line up with my parents, or my parents believe this religion, and there was this, sometimes they could articulate it, sometimes they couldn't, but kind of coming back to your question, for me, working in that age group, the best gift I ever got as a therapist was to be able to help individuals identify what it even meant when we said identity. Like, what are we even talking about? I have this thing called an identity module that I work with people where they create a personal mission statement, and we get to look at other things, and we get to talk about values. I do a value cards exercise where they have 100 different values, some of which they've never even heard of, some of which they know, but they couldn't have articulated it without the cards. And they pick them, and we order them, and then we cut them in half, and then we order them, and they come down to like, what are your main, and they do a bunch of exercises to help them figure out their identity. Now, at 16, 17, 14, 15, like I'm obviously not, and my limited time with them, we're not gonna create their identity, right? But we're gonna give them a starting place to be able to, a jump off place, or at least collect some ideas like, oh, values are part of my identity. Boundaries are part of my identity. Who I bring in and out of my life is part of my identity. My tech is, and how much I do it and don't do it, right? So,
what? Sorry?
Like tech, like screen time.
Okay.
How, especially these days, right? How do I control my screen time, or do my screen time control
digital
me?
Identity.
Yeah, my digital identity. But not just even like how I do on digital identity, because we also talk about that, right? Like what people are seeing, what jobs might be seeing, what colleges might be seeing, but also what are you portraying, and do you know, and you're owning that? Or is it just happening because meaning how much control are you of your identity on digital life, but also here? And so for me, that was a long answer to your question about it. Really, for me, all comes back to that. If you don't know who you are, and I would say as a religious person, whose you are, meaning you don't know who your identity is, then it's really hard to make decisions in your life. It's really hard to have boundaries.
Right.
And if you can't do that, like coming back to the purpose of this podcast, it's really hard to measure your progress. It feels really messy. It's like 10 steps forwards and 3 steps back. It can be really messy if you have a goal or you have a purpose or you're like driving in a beginning with the end in mind, right? But if you really don't know, then it's so messy, and it's already messy to be a teen, and it's really already hard to want to be an adult, but you're not an adult, to make decisions in your life right now while you're making decisions for your future. So yeah, I'm saying this focused on teens, but I don't know an adult in the world that doesn't need to work on their identity, right?
No kidding.
And you can tell. When you walk in rooms with people, you can tell who's done the work and who hasn't, right? People who know who they are, right? Or whose they are is what I would say. So yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing that. You really are getting right to the heart of the purpose of this podcast.
Yeah.
I started the show in 2020, and I started it as a guide for my younger self.
Okay.
When I was 12 and 13 years old, I really struggled with mental illness.
Yeah.
And I didn't recognize it at the time, but it was an identity struggle as well.
Okay.
And I wouldn't actually say that my struggle was that much more unique or exaggerated than most people actually experience, either at that time or some other time in their life. It's a time of huge transition.
Yes.
And we all have to decide at a certain point who we are. And a huge part of my identity at that time was a victim mentality. And I think the pendulum swung far to the point where I was no longer a victim. I was a warrior, and nobody was going to do anything, and I get to choose everything about my life. And now I think I've come to kind of
the overcompensation, right? And now you're swinging back.
I think I'm starting to get to a place of wisdom where I understand that not everything that happens to me is my choice, but my identity is actually found in the way that I respond to the opportunities presented to me and the circumstances that I'm placed in.
Yeah.
And so the identity shift is huge. If you want to make progress, that's one of the first things. I think, especially with fitness, that was a huge part of my mental health uprise. Once I started exercising, everything about my identity changed because I learned that progress is possible. By changing my body, I learned that I could also change my mind.
And regression is part of that, right? Like the breaking down of our muscles so that we can build up our muscles, right? It's the same way with really any other kind of identity. Built and baked into the process is going to be failure. If you don't understand that, progress is rough.
Yeah.
If you think it's just going to go in a linear fashion or...
And thinking about therapy in that way is almost tearing down the muscles or deconstructing the identity so you can reconstruct it more intentionally.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's a painful process that brings out some...
Yeah. I will say this. Therapy should be a little bit off kilter, I call it. It should be comfortable enough that you can like feel aligned and do the work, and it should be uncomfortable enough that you feel like you're stretching and growing. But if either side of those are too good, if you feel too comfortable, maybe not a good alignment with your therapist, maybe you're not doing the work. If you feel too uncomfortable, maybe not good alignment also. Maybe you don't feel safe, maybe you don't feel... I say that because I think therapy, I'm obviously biased about therapy, but finding the right therapist is really key to being able to grow all these things. Say your unspeakable things, help with your identity, help mark your progress, in therapy. So it should be uncomfortable, but like most people and most friendships, like it's not a really great friendship if you can't sort of say hard things to your friend and they still stick around and you grow in that, right? The best friendships people have, probably they've had some kind of sticking points or some kind of sticking things and you moved ahead. If you just sort of have friends that you never have problems with, I don't know how deep those roots go. They might just be your like time and season friends. I also see it like that. It's like, you do have to like grow and stretch, but there's a balance, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Kind of touching back at the idea of changing behavior is different than changing identity.
Yeah.
I think especially in the gym is one place where people experience that. Some people will come to the gym and they'll come in with this identity of, I need to get fit so that I can be lovable.
Yeah.
Or so that, you know what I mean?
I need to be hot so somebody will pick me.
If somebody else, exactly. But for me, the thing that allowed me to make progress in the gym was when I realized that my body was a gift. And I accepted that identity of I am powerful, and that's what drove me to reach my goals. And so I just think it's so important to build from a foundation of self-love and of identity. It's not just based on what people see or the behaviors and outcomes.
Yeah.
But really starts at
there's
home.
an external and there's an internal, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you don't control the external at all,
Yeah.
right? So like, I mean, this is basic building blocks of therapy says the only person I control is myself.
Mm-hmm.
So like, does it impact you? Yeah. And like, I would be remiss if I didn't say as a therapist, if you're not sleeping well and you're not eating well and you're not moving your body and you just work on your brain and your heart and you don't work on that, like it's not gonna go as well for you, right? If you are trying really hard to like be seen and dated by people that some people might call out of your league, but you're not doing anything to sort of look or get better, like that is a problem. It's a mismatch. Do I think that people should have to do that? No, but if you want to attract a certain person, you have to do a certain thing to get that, right? But the change shouldn't be outward in, right? It should be inward out. But we do live in a world where like both impact each other. So as a therapist, I try really hard to sit in that reality. If we just sit on the what I can control, we can sometimes get lost in like just like what the circumstances we live in, right? And if we just stick on the outside, we're just chopping off branches all the time. We're just like behavior, right? Like that is going to change depending on the circumstance. I call them fires, fire. And every day of every year of everything, of every new job, of every new relationship is going to bring up new fires. You're the constant, you're the common denominator
right.
of life. So you're the only one that, you know, we can really work on. So yeah, root work or like root identity stuff is where you're going to get your bang for your buck, right? Mm-hmm. Like that's where the energy, I mean, same thing with the gym, right? Your basic building blocks is where you're going to get your most growth. And then you can work on other things that like build areas, but like really there's no one's going to come around in mental health, I don't think anytime soon, even with the new neuroscience and stuff that we have, that's going to say anything contradictory to like drink a lot of water, move your body,
right?
And by the way, fuel your body and sleep. Like,
all those things are interrelated.
Yeah. And those things have such an impact on people's identity, and they do not connect the dots, right? Like if I can't think well, if I can't move well, if I don't have enough endorphins, if I don't have enough certain dopamine, if I don't have enough, then neuroscience is coming and saying, then I'm going to go find that in other ways, and I'm going to numb things, and I'm going to do this, or I'm going to have maladaptive behaviors. And sometimes those are safety issues of maladaptive, and sometimes they're just like what we have in front of us, but most of the time they're not healthy, right? Like to be able to identify that like the way that I sleep and eat and move and feel my body has an impact about the way I can then interact with the world is so basic, but I think in our world today, like it's so hard to. We don't want to do hard things. We want to do easy things. We want to do things that are instantaneous.
Right.
You know?
Yeah. I
We're in the Ozempic world, right? I'm not saying anything necessarily bad about that, but we are in a world where it's like, can I get the change without changing any of the other things?
Right.
And if that's the case, I'll do that, because having to change all the things to create this seems like a lot of work, right? And I'm always going to be, I'm a writer and I'm a therapist, and I'm always going to say doing it the hard, long, good way, healthy way is always going to bring about better dividends than any shortcut, any temporary change, right?
I think this identity talk, it's important to mention there might be times where you identify that your identity is actually something you're not super proud of. Yeah. And you have to believe in an identity that isn't yet created, but believe that you can create it through your choices.
Yes.
And for me, that was something that was revolutionary. So I want to turn the page and talk about...
Can I say one thing before you turn the page?
Yeah.
I want to actually separate even more what you just said. Yeah. I want to say that your behavior is separate from your identity. And I want to say sometimes you're behaving or thinking in a way that is not in an alignment with who you identify or want to identify with being. But that your identity as a whole, or your worth or your worthiness, never changes, whether your behaviors. And so part of that unalignment is figuring out how to get back to this space, right? Just by figuring out what your identity is and who you are is essential to that. How do you know when I'm off? How do I know when I'm on, right? But that like people themselves, you're always lovable, you're always worth, you're always valuable no matter what your circumstances are, right? Yeah. And your circumstances or behavior can change, and you can identify and come back, but that's just like really key.
Yeah, that comment is illuminating for me, reflected on my own journey, because it kind of reveals maybe why I felt uncomfortable with who I was. Is because that true identity, the progress guy, that I'm closer to today, he was always there.
Yeah, but unaligned, right? You saw yourself as this kind of a person, and you were living this kind of a life. Yeah, and there's a gap, right? The gap is very uncomfortable for people. Yeah.
I want to talk about you finding your belonging place, or maybe creating it is a better word, and the journey that you've had with your own identity.
Yeah, so it's interesting because I didn't pick up an identity that I'm going to talk about that has helped me create it by choice. So the identity feature that I'm going to talk about that I usually don't focus on, but I thought a lot about this one before coming here is being single.
Yeah.
So I have been single for lots of years. Let's just say 20 plus years. And I did not think that would be my case. I just, like everybody, I just thought like at some point I'd get married. But as a result of that circumstance, you could say, in my life, it lends to a whole bunch of things that helped contribute to my belonging places. So what I mean by that is, when your identity or your belonging places change by who comes in and comes out of your life, right? And if you're not careful, that can be really messy, who you let in and who you let out, right? But by nature, most people, I'll just use my example, that are single for a long period of time, it lends to your need to let go of friends and make new friends, and let go of friends and make new friends. And some of the letting go is just naturally, like, they get married and have kids. Maybe you stay friends with some of those, but you don't usually stay friends with all of those because you're in different life. Maybe you, like for me, I went to college, my undergraduate one place, and then I served in LDS mission one place, and then I joined AmeriCorps, which is like domestic Peace Corps, and I lived in Boston, and then I came back and I lived in Arizona for grad school. All of those places have, new people, new hobbies, new things, and you can either lean in or you can lean out, right? So a big part of my identity, why I came to wanting to do the belonging place, was that I realized that part of happiness for me as a single person meant that I could either sit in a victim mentality of like, why does everybody seem to be able to figure this out? Not only figure it out, but they get married and divorced and married before I've even had a date. Like, this is the joke that would happen, right? It's like, and why do people get to be mothers? Like mothers that don't even like their kids, or drug addicts that have kids. There's like this whole thought process that you could have. And I just never aligned with that. I never believed in a God who was like, I love you more and I love you less. That's not how my Father is. And that's not how I don't think my Heavenly Father is. So if that's not the case, then there's a little bit of this, why don't I get my righteous desires? And so part of me was just like, I had a mentor who said to me when I was like 26 or something, if you knew you weren't going to get married for 10 years, like you just knew it, then how would your life be different? And I was grateful that I could answer, well, like, I'd just be doing what I'm doing.
Yeah.
And some people couldn't answer that way. Maybe that would have shifted their life. But I said to him, it was a mentor of mine, I said, I think I'd just be building the kingdom where I am. And he's like, okay, then does it matter then if you're married or not married? Like, why are you holding so tightly to this other identity? Like, just be who you are and show up where you are and build the kingdom where you are. And part of my identity was stop waiting for other people to create belonging spaces. In the church that I belong to, there's sort of this, at this age and single, you can be in this group, and then at this age, you can be at this group, or like, there's like, sort of, I call them walls of like the church or the school. In schools, there's like a certain pathway that they tell you, like, this is how it goes. And then at a certain point, the path opens and it's like, good luck, figure it out, And so I watched a lot of my peers and people be like, it's really easy to be a victim and be like, why doesn't the church help us? And why doesn't this system? And I just kind of sat and was like, is it anybody's role outside of me? Is it anybody's job outside of me to like make me happy? I wasn't that good at it back then to say that term, but this is where I am now. But ultimately I was like, it's nobody else's job. I can either find places where I belong, or I can create places where I belong, and that's it. So I can either not belong and be sad about it, which doesn't invite connection. Like, if you look at people that sort of spin their wheels in life hoping they'll get married, or hoping they'll get a job, or hoping this thing will come, they're in the waiting. they're not that attractive. And I don't just mean physically, I literally mean emotionally and otherwise. This is not attracting to people, right? Like, so I watched some people, particularly women, do this, and I was like, ugh, I do not want to be that. Like, that cannot be attractive. Like, I'm gonna be my best self. I'm going to start things, even though I don't know how to start things. I'm just going to and this is probably the biggest part of my identity that I want to share, is that I was not afraid to fail.
Yeah.
I just failed, hopefully forward more than backwards. I could do that. Why? I could do that because I had a family that was just amazing. I could do that because I had a church belonging place that was amazing. I could do that because I was never going to not have a roof over my head or food on my plate or, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I knew. Like, I had enough people around me, my family, my extended family, that I was never going to go hungry. I was never going to go. When you have an assurity of these things, man, you can do a lot of failing because you're never going to fall so far. Does that make sense? And I knew that was a privilege. I was like, you got to take advantage of that privilege. You got to just start the nonprofit. You got to try and write the book. You got to join AmeriCorps and live in poverty, because if it's so bad, you can always move home. You got to do the thing. And in the doing of the things that were so hard and scary, that's where you find yourself. That's where you grow. Those are the growth edge. You can't grow unless you put yourself out in a place where you're uncomfortable. You can't belong unless you try to fit in or try to create spaces. And ultimately, kind of come back to what you said, you can't connect to anybody if you don't connect to yourself, right? So all that journey that I just talked to you about, that back and forth, that growth, was me figuring out me. I'm pretty solid me. I've been pretty solid me for 15 years now. You pick me up, you know what you get. But that's because I have been tried and tested in all kinds of countries and foods and languages and leadership opportunities. I thought who I was, and then I put it out there, and then I got a reflection of that. I allowed myself to have lots of hard conversations, critical feedback conversations. I did something, I wrote this in my book that I published a few years ago, but I did something that I don't necessarily recommend everybody do, but I asked 10 people in my life, some of which were ex-boyfriends, to write me back honest feedback of things that they think might be getting in the way of me dating or other things in my life, things that they normally would never tell me, but I was soliciting it.
Wow.
Right?
Okay.
And in those 10 people that I identified, I really told them, it's not to my benefit that you just say nice things. This is not this. I wouldn't be reaching out to you. This is a real big growth edge vulnerability. And to say that I was scared, I didn't vomit, but if I was a vomiter, I was scared to death in the reception of this. And was it brutal? Yes, because feedback is feedback, critical feedback, right?
You open an envelope with your eyes closed.
Oh my gosh. And I didn't even tell people about this experience for years because I was like, this was brutal. Did I learn things I would have never learned without it? Yes. There were some things that I easily changed that I could never have seen. I couldn't see it. I couldn't know it. I couldn't taste it. There was no way. So do I feel like it was the best thing that I ever did? Can I kind of lay my head down at night and say did I really try to find out if I'm the problem or if it's just timing in life? Did I, so there, I don't recommend necessarily that, but part of your identity is being really willing to see yourself reflected in other people. Right? You can only do the work so much on yourself. We have blind spots. I mean, part of therapy is that you throw things up against the wall against somebody who's not invested in your outcome, and they can help you see where your holes are, where you're missing. They can reflect back to you. Well, have you thought about it this way? Or have you looked at this way? Because when you're throwing it up on the wall, they can see the holes that you can't see, right? This is why marriage, this is why friendships, they are a mirror of each other. We need people to reflect back to us our good, our strengths, and our weaknesses so that we can grow. So part of my individual identity that I realized pretty early on and I'm grateful for was that if I wanted to grow as a single person, I would have to continue to put myself in places that would be uncomfortable, or I would very quickly become comfortable just being who I am. It's really easy to be happy and single, to be honest. Like, really. Like, you get the job, you make the money, you have the house, you have the car, you sort of spend the money the way you want to spend it, you travel, you do your thing. And quite frankly, I think a lot of people are just like, yeah, I like single.
Right.
And some people are really lonely in that, but I think more people are almost ashamed to say, like, I kind of like it here, The
compromises I'm making here, I can deal
with.
with.
So part of me realized if I want the growth of what comes in a marriage or as a mother or in a family or in a team or in a whatever, I need to put myself in those positions, or I need to create those positions.
Yeah. There's so
I
much.
hope I answered my
please.
question.
No, that was really, there's so much value in what you shared there. And honestly, I'm going to be chewing on it for a while, but a couple of things that I want to point on. I just love what you mentioned about how we just don't exist in a vacuum. It's important that we create an internal place of belonging, and you mentioned that the failures and even the feedback, they're not internalized. We can learn from them. They can show us a version of ourselves and inform our adjustments. But you come back home, and home is with Kylee. Even if a certain role in your life didn't work out, your identity is independent from that role. And I
need to like myself.
Yeah.
Because I've been single for so long and I'm the common denominator. Thank the heavens that I like to be with me.
Right. Well, that's good. That's the only person you're always going to be with.
Yeah.
And back to the idea, like just the idea that our identities don't exist in a vacuum. I've done several exercises to uncover identity and find values. And usually the concept that I come back to is the concept of being a servant. And service. And that honestly is super empowering for me. I never would have overcome some of the struggles that I had with mental illness without it. I never would have overcome some of the crutches or maybe addictions that I've struggled with without it. But at the same time, I've recognized more recently how sometimes I lean into the identity of servant as almost a crutch.
Okay.
Or a role that just I can't feel comfortable unless I'm the servant.
Okay.
And so sometimes it limits my relationships where somebody else can't play that role for me when I need it. And so maybe you're seeing where I'm coming from. And that doesn't mean that being a servant, that's not a bad identity to have.
Yeah.
It's something I need to hold on, but I need to use it in ways that are healthy.
Yeah, I think when you ask me, like I'm one part of my identity is being single, but it was the easiest way to show that example of my growth of my identity. But like if you were to ask me the growth edge side or the kind of weaknesses that come out of that is a hyper independence, right? Or like when you're saying hyper servant mindset, by default, I had to figure out how to do it on my own. I had to buy my own house. I had to buy my own car. I had to I didn't want it. I went kind of kicking and screaming. Like the person that I was buying my house with, I was like crying in the process. And they're like, most people are really happy. And I was like, I know, most people aren't doing it on their own by themselves. I just wanted to do this with part. So sometimes in my life, I would have to come back to this place and be like, do I even put off that I would need a partner? Because if someone's looking at me, if there's guys out there that are like, she does everything for herself, there's no opening for someone to come in, there's not a spot, right? So there's something to be said about being too much of one thing. If you're too independent or hyper vigilant, or if all I think about myself is servant oriented, then people and maybe even if I come across as humble, but in my humility, I have all that I need. Yeah. Because I can serve everybody. There's a knowledge they're so capable. Let's just say the word is capable. That person's capable. That when you need help from somebody else, they sort of don't see you as a person that could have problems. And then we run into this problem of this listening and unspeakable things, right? Part of my identity that was really hard in the process, when people see me as a therapist or saw me as an author, or when they saw me as a nonprofit founder, when they sort of put onto my identity, you've got it all figured out. And then I don't have it all figured out. And then I need safe places. And I would go to those safe places many times. That would disrupt their role in my role in their life. My role in their life is to be steady, and my role in their life is to be happy, and my role in their life is when they have problems, they come to you. But when I have problems, it shakes the very, and I realize in that process, I am underserving myself and others when I am seen as too capable. Like I need to then be more vulnerable. I need to lean into people. I need to ask them if they can't do it well. Like, can you just listen longer with me? Because some people would just switch the dialogue. I would say, hey, I have some things I want to talk to you about. I would start to talk. They would start the process, and they're so used to, and I don't mean this in a mean way, they're just so used to being heard by me that they would flip the script. And next thing you know, they've unintentionally shut me down. Part of that was my problem. I created a dynamic where I listened and they spoke. Yeah. Right? So I had to start to kind of coach some of my friends again, like, it's my turn. I didn't say it like that, but like, it's my turn now. We're going to carve out, and none of them ever felt bad. None of them ever were like, what do you mean it's your turn? Most of them were relieved because they didn't see themselves as capable enough to hold my things because they saw themselves as the person bringing the problems. Yeah. Right? And when I was able to turn the tables and say like, hey, I would really like your advice, they saw themselves differently in their own eyes through my eyes. They're like, oh, she's asking me. I have things to bring to the table. It's this very symbiotic thing that we have when we connect with others, right? That's huge. Yeah. I wish I knew the details of this study so I could cite it more appropriately, but it's kind of just like a inkling of a memory somewhere in my mind. I think it might be Simon Sinek, Leaders Eat Last, that tells us. Ooh, story. I love this. But you tell me if you recognize it, if it's from somewhere else, whatever. But it talks about this college professor who was teaching about leadership, and instead of him always being the mentor, he assigned students to be mentors to each other, and playing the role of mentor gave them the confidence to become one. Was the basic setup. Yeah, I got a therapist on my podcast, a good friend of mine, Cameron, a few episodes ago that and he in a class was called up to the front of the class. It wasn't a therapy. Well, it might have been a therapy class, but he wasn't necessarily going to be a therapist. It was just like an intro to whatever. Anyway, the teacher asked him to sit up there, and he did some reflective whatever, and he did a really good job, not really knowing the skills. And it was interesting because later in his life, this professor saw him later and on an elevator, was able to kind of get back to him. Man, that really changed my life. And it was in that moment that he decided to be a therapist. But this idea of like, when you give somebody the opportunity to rise above what they have, or when you give them this power to like when you write them in the story, when you give them the space, when you empower them to like use what they have, people rise to the occasion for that. And it's wild, right? So if you're not gifting people in your life the chance to do that, what a missed opportunity, right? Yeah, I love how you give credit to your family and your church for being creating a belonging place for you so that you could rise from that foundation. Yeah, I think you can't. I built the Belonging Place podcast on the null hypothesis that this is true. The only way that you can like fail and sort of, mostly fail is that if you have a safety net. Can you actually like go out and fail and build things and grow belonging places, and I call them wells, if you don't have a safety net? I don't think you can. I think it's really hard. So I started with that premise, and then I started interviewing people and talking to people to see if what I was saying is true. So far, it's true, right? Everybody I talk to, their ability to grow, their ability to progress, their ability to move ahead in their job, their ability to move ahead in their family, or whatever they talked about, was pretty interwoven in their ability to how safe they felt, how connected they felt, how purposeful they felt in their life, which is what I call a belonging place, right? Yeah. So, yeah. That is really a revelatory bit of information, because sometimes I think I get in the mindset of burn the ships, Cortez. Yes. Like, I'm going to make no backup plan. I'm going all the way for it. But I think that is something that's important, to create some relationships where actually they're not based on your achievement. If I call my mom and I tell her about what went on today, it doesn't matter if I messed up at school and messed up at my job and messed up in my other relationships. Yeah. She's my mom. Yeah. She loves me. And that gives me the confidence to know that I can try again and even fail again and be okay. Yeah, I think I never would have started a nonprofit, or I never would have joined AmeriCorps. I'm just talking about two things that had really high fail rates. Yeah. If I didn't always know in the back of my mind I could move home. Now, I know that there's a lot of people that just don't have that option. They just can't move home, right? So that is a privilege that has given me, like, anywhere. It's also, I got laid off like 7 months ago, and I'm in a financial place in my life where I could just find the next job. But like, even then I was like, if I have to sell my house, I will never be homeless. Yeah. I'm one of 7 living siblings. My dad has 9 brothers and sisters. Like, there's a lot of people that have couches and places for me to live before I'm going to be homeless. In fact, I don't even know. And I have friends who have friends, right? There is something to be said about being kind and caring and connecting that will secure your basic needs. And if you kind of always know that like you're going to be safe, you don't have to, you can have a growth mindset or an abundance mindset. You don't have to have a scarcity mindset.
Yeah.
Because scarcity is real. Like when people say like, if you really don't have enough money, if you really don't have a place to like fall back to, if you really don't have, you know, safety, then you really, I don't think you really can try things and do things and experiment, right? But when you begin like at your age or even younger, if you start right here weaving a tapestry, as you get older in your life and you do these things, you've just built, I just call it a safety net because I think of the trapeze.
Yeah.
You've just built and woven an ability to like fall. And to me, if you look at people that are what we call successful, right? They've got gobs and gobs of failure to get to their success, right? Totally. I don't think you can be really successful. I mean, the same thing in relationships. Most people who are in really good relationships went through some bad relationships to get there, to pick out what they like and what they don't like and what they want to grow in, you know, like it's sometimes you win the lottery and you marry the first person you date and it's great, but like most people have to like try and fail. So part of like the gift that you give yourself is connection. Like, and the better you have connection and the more diverse your connection is, and not for profit, not for benefit, not for how can I tap into you later, what, just be good and collect good, and it's awesome what comes back. It's sort of like planting seeds now and then, you know, the fruits of the labor down the line. Did I know that when I was younger? No. I feel like really grateful that was just part of my way of being, right? Arbinger calls it like your way of being, like being able to have an outward mindset or being able to have a heart at peace, right? I feel grateful that I just like kind of fell upon that. Now, at a certain point in my age, I looked around at my life and I said, oh, I need to now do this intentionally. I've done it by accident. I now need to do it intentionally. I need to tap in certain people into my life. I need to choose my friends. The friends that I choose will determine who I become. If I just fall into whatever friends I have, fine, they're going to be great. But if I pick and choose certain people, I need to be the dumbest person in the room at times in my life. Otherwise, I can't grow. Sometimes I'm not the dumbest person in the room because people are learning and growing from me in those circumstances, right? But for a long time, I was like, how do I get in the rooms where I know the least, where I can learn the most, which is also very uncomfortable, right? So like most of these things I'm talking about, you sort of have to just get comfortable with being uncomfortable. Absolutely. If you're not a person who's ready to fail or uncomfortable, I'm not sure you're ready really to progress.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Kylee, you have a great love for music.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's a coping mechanism for you, for your mental health, your well-being, but it's also involved with your nonprofit. Would you like to share some about that?
Yeah, I would say music is the coping skill for me. So like I know that if I'm not playing the piano on a regular basis or some kind of singing, that things are off. When we talk about self-care, a lot of people think of it as like bubble baths and getting your nails done. And
sure. Indulgent, really.
Even the gym, right? For I would say a lot of men, like, I always describe self-care as the thing that like, you know, you should be doing. That's kind of scratching you behind the head that you just aren't doing that you should be doing. That's probably self-care. For me, like being able to play and do music is like, I need to do it. And when I'm not doing it, I can look around my life and say, oh, I'm stressed enough that I stop doing the thing that's actually the coping skill. And the second I bring that back in, everything seems to go better, right? So instead of using a coping skill when you're stressed, like the idea is just use it always, right? So I try to just instill and carve out space in my life to just always be able to have it in some capacity. One of those things, years and years ago, my best friend down in Arizona, he had been in like BYU's Vocal Point, which is just like a really elite choir. And I had sung in lots of different choirs and we were both, you know, I was out of grad school, we were both out of college, and we both just wanted to sing, and we mostly wanted to sing about Christ because we were both Christians. And we decided that there's probably other people who want to sing. This is the beginning of belonging places idea, right? Like, I also, if I'm being honest, was like, I would love to date somebody who likes to sing.
There you go. Okay.
So why not? fine.
Sure.
Like if we build a well of like a choir, then maybe there will be guys that will come, and that will be a good dating pool, because this is how I think dating should work. You create a whole bunch of hobby pools, right? And people come into those hobbies or those ideas, and they find each other organically. You don't get on an app, or you don't, So we started this choir, which is a fireside group, which has a theme every year, and we sing about Christ. And we down in Arizona, we're 13 years in, and up here in Utah, we are in our 6th season. And I have seen a lot of fruits of that. I have dated some people from that. It hasn't worked out, but like it's been great. I have seen people, specifically in an area that touches your heart. We've had multiple people come in fairly suicidal, or sort of like, even if they weren't suicidal, they realized that they were, because after they got into the choir and they realized how bad something was. We've had a lot of people with faith crisis. We've had a lot of people with trying to figure things out on the LGBTQ scale about like where Christ fits for them. But all of these people loved music, and all these people loved Christ. And when you create a space to just bring a bunch of people, we have married couples, we have single people, we've gone down to a 17-year-old, and I think up to a 70-year-old. When you put a whole bunch of people together who have a united goal, right? There's something magical that happens. When we created, and it's called Inspire Chorus. When we created Inspire Chorus, the goal was for people to get together and sing their testimonies. The added benefit was the audience. Yeah. Does that make sense? Yeah. So the choir, other choirs and other performances, that's not how they're set up. They are set up audience first, which I have nothing problem. I have no problem. Yeah. I'm a performer, right? Yeah. But that was not Inspire Chorus. So if we get better people in the choir, and if people are more talented, the outward manifestation is better, right? The audience gets better. But the cool thing is, like, the choirs at the core, and the people that are in the choir, and the belonging place, and the friendships, and the testimony growing, and the internal, we do devotionals internally before our firesides, and like the growth that happens here. Then when they get to stand in front of people, we sing directorless. So there's nobody directing us, because we don't want anything between us and the audience to fill the Spirit. So we also have to learn. The process that we learn is we have to work our way out of having a director. So we use a lot of the accompaniment. We do a lot of interesting things inside the choir. We have to sing really well together. We have to breathe really well together. We have to become kind of one organism, right? And then we get to stand in front of people, and we get to share the message of Christ and peace, and it's really powerful. And the dividend back to the choir is they get to see this experience happen in real time. They get to see other people experience the work they've done. They get to feel the Spirit. So it has this multiple layers. It is the perfect example of what I hope people do all over. Build a place for just you, your book club, your whatever, I love the Hope Squad. Build a squad. Right. And if all you change is the squad, it's enough. If you change other people because the squad synergizes, it's enough. If the squad goes everywhere else, it's even more, right? Yeah. It's this like multiplicity that says, like, wherever you do the thing. But this is where music came for me, is I knew that it could be, like, for me, it could be more than just the art of singing, or the art of even, like, it. When you bring people together and you bring music together, sometimes this is the only way, or the best way, that people feel the Spirit, more than speaking, more than writing. So I was like, how do we synergize? Yeah. How do we do the thing and the thing and the thing? And it's become a little bit of its own teaching. We just started. We didn't know how to do it. No one really said, this is how you do it. I do not have a conducting degree. And for the first 3 years, I was the conductor, right? I have a passion for music. I do have a lot of music background. People were just kind of patient, and then we got some people that really knew what they were doing, and they came in, and I continue to look back at Inspire Course and what it's done, and I think I guess I want to say this extra thing, because you were asking me about my identity. Sometimes I feel like if I don't get married and I don't have kids and I don't have progeny, then, like, did I miss the boat? Did I just not do the thing I was supposed to do, right? There's this idea that that's what women are supposed to do. They're supposed to have kids, and they're supposed to have families. I can look back and I can say, I did that thing, And if that's the only thing, and I get to do that as a therapist, and I get to do that with my podcast. You know, I've created a bunch of places, but for people that are sort of feeling a loss or a victim mentality about that they missed the boat or they missed the bus or they like are on the wrong timing, sometimes I think don't let the world tell you that. Sometimes you have to create your own progeny or your own legacy or your own mark. And the mark and the legacy can be a thing, but often it's the people, right? It's the people, the lives that you touch and come in and out of your life. So I can lay my head down at night and be like, that was a good thing.
Yeah.
And that helped a lot of people, and those people helped a lot of people. And like, I didn't know what I was doing, but it's okay. You can just start somewhere.
Right.
You know?
Right. That's so beautiful. Once again, I just need to make sure you guys all know where to find Kylee and listen to more of her stuff on the Belonging Podcast. And please check out her social media channels. I'm sure, well, we've only touched the tip of the iceberg today. And I'm sure you guys are excited to learn more about everything that you're working on. We're going to dive into a couple rapid fire
great
questions. You've had extensive experience, but I'd love to hear what you've learned from working with just each of these organizations. Maybe give a brief overview of what they are, what they do, and then what you learned from ANASAZI is the first one I'm curious about.
Quick, ANASAZI is a wilderness program for kids that are having all kinds of mental health behavioral problems, and they get to go out in the woods. I was a shadow, they're called, a therapist. ANASAZI, we're going to talk about ANASAZI and we're going to talk about HEFY, and I'm just going to tell you the common denominator. I met my best friend at ANASAZI and my other best friend at HEFY. The best gifts that these organizations gave me were my forever best friends that I've had. So I just want to say, join things, do things, go to the camp, right? This is where, but ANASAZI at its core uses Arbinger, the Arbinger Institute, and people come and they get to experience, you bring all your problems. But you can scream at the tree and you can kick the rock only so long. It's not going to scream back. It's not going to kick back. Eventually you have to come to your own self. You have to own your own place in your life. You can only be mad at your parents so long or your teachers so long or whoever brought you to the space. ANASAZI is big about coming to yourself and coming to your maker. And for me, there's lots of ways that ANASAZI can be applied to your life, but I always give this one example. ANASAZI has what's called the making of an asking. So they basically, when you're on the trail with the trail walkers, which are our guides or they will basically help you kind of put some stuff together when you get on the trail, but they're not going to tell you how to do it the best way, and they're definitely not going to tell you how to do it the most efficient way.
When you say put stuff together, do you mean camping equipment?
Well, there's no camping equipment. First of all, you have a sling pack and you have a food that comes in there's no meat, but it comes in you've got flour and you've got sugar and you've got oats and you've got tang and it's like a food pack, right? Yeah. And you have to sort of figure out how to put your canteen, and you're hiking from one cow tank. So these are just big holes in the middle of the Arizona where the cows come, and you're getting your water from that and you're putting bleach drops in, you're drinking it. Sometimes they drop water if you don't. I mean, it's wilderness, right? But the goal is that you can become self-sufficient, that you can learn that if they camp and you don't know how to make your tent or your tarp or you can either try and fail and be wet if it rains all night and wake up the next morning and you're miserable, or you can do the making of an asking. No one's going to tell you that that's a thing. But if you ask the trail walker who knows how to do it really well, hey, can you help me make they will tell you not only how to do it, but the best and most efficient way, and you will never have to ask for that again. And you will be dry and you will be fine, and you will learn, hopefully, that you can just try life, or you can do the making of an asking. Ooh. So that's one principle at ANASAZI among many, and we don't talk about them very much because they're the secret sauce. You don't want to reveal them, But I share this one because I think this is basically what we call natural consequences. And in parenting, it's sometimes hard for parents to do natural consequences because the natural thing is too hard. You can't just let your kids fail out of high school by natural consequences. So you try really hard, but at ANASAZI, we live and breathe it. So if you want to learn the relationship between yourself and consequences, or the making of an asking, or coming to yourself. So as a therapist, there's no better way to do coping skills. If I'm trying to teach you about TIP, which is temperature change, and for anxiety or coming, we're just gonna go stick our face in the water. We're just going to go lay down in the grass. When we talk about touch grass, right? We're just going to be one with nature. People walked themselves out of depression, right? They're off their medication, and 6-7 weeks of hiking in the sun, in like a vegetarian diet, right? And really stinky because unless you go on a river, which a lot of them didn't because they're cold, and they walk themselves into happiness. I can't do that no matter how much you pay me as a therapist in an office. Like I could sit with you session and session and session, right? So there's a gift that like the grounding and nature teaches you. So that might have been more than you wanted, but ANASAZI. Okay. Now what's the next one? Yeah.
Let's do HXP.
Okay. HXP is humanitarian experience. Some people might know them. I'm just going to throw back because as HEFY. I was too old, I think. But they let me be a trip leader and I was able to go to Fiji.
Oh, wow.
So I was a trip leader for 3 weeks in Fiji. I had a partner, shout out to Brock. And we took a bunch of kids, bunch of 16, 17, 8, maybe 18, I don't know. Anyways, that age of kids. I think 18, I think even 19 maybe. And we got to build septic tanks in a little small village called Nakarani outside of Suva, which is just like one of the main cities in Fiji. But the people in Fiji have a saying called Pula Vanaka, which is basically a little bit like...
God is good.
Yeah. And it also is like aloha, or like in Pura Vida, like lots of people have sayings that are basically like welcome, God is good. And in Fiji it really was like what's mine is yours. So it is God is good, but it's like God is good and I have it, so you have it too.
Oh, I love that.
Right? And also what's yours is mine. So like, and we know this.
Okay.
And it's accepted. So you can imagine culturally.
Sure.
The thing that HXP taught me is going to be similar. I don't know if we're going to ask about EFY, but both of those set me up to learn and grow leadership skills that I could not have learned otherwise. I am the leader I am today as a director, as a clinical director, not because I went to grad school and not because I learned. You don't learn how to be a leader in grad school. You don't learn how to be a leader. Like, I learned how to be a leader when I was a trip leader. I have all these kids in my hands and my hearts. I'm their parent. I'm their boundary keeper. I'm their safety keeper. I also had to do discipline, right? Like I had to set them straight. We're in a foreign country. You can't do this. Like, this is not okay. I had to have really hard, difficult conversations. I learned my critical conversations and my ability to sit with people and have out of these spaces, right? At EFY, I was a field coordinator. They have these different positions, over 600 people at a time in San Diego and then in Santa Barbara. There was nobody above me. I was like, how are they letting this 25-year-old run everything? Run the program speakers, run the this. I literally all the time was like, what are they doing? But they empowered us, and because they empowered us, we did it. And we did it good. They had principles and they had guidelines and they had books that they trained us on. But really they just said, give them the principles and they'll govern themselves, and then they trusted us. And I think like I owe a lot of who I am and as a leader to like being thrown in difficult but amazing circumstances that allowed me to grow as a leader. I really recommend people putting themselves in positions to be a leader before you're old enough or before you think you can.
The discomfort necessitates.
Yes.
You have to make progress or else. Thank you much for sharing that. Is there anything you wanted to add about EFY or group that with HXP?
They're both kind of similar to me. I think the one difference that I would say, and this is more to the HXP, the other side of my nonprofit that we haven't talked about that people can look is we did this choir, and then we also for 9 years I've done international tours with teens. So part of Inspire, my nonprofit is called Inspire Music Service Hope, and part of Inspire Music Service Hope was doing these, which is similar to kind of HXP. But the thing about international travel, international service, like when I say service, I mean sustainable service and not in-kind service, like where you show up and give things. I mean create the cement, build the thing, right? There's nothing like it. There's nothing like it as a director, as a teacher, as a kid. I think everybody, whether it's HXP, whether it's whatever, find a way to go to a place you've never been, in a language you've never spoken, with support, right? And food you've never had, and you will never love people more. They are intrinsically, you cannot go and serve people. You cannot be off kilter where you don't know the food and you don't know, and not just fall madly deeply in love with people. And the more you learn and get curious about other people, the more you can bring back into your life, especially if you live in a kind of a homogenous, white, same religion, same place. Like, how do you learn and grow? So that's the only other thing I would say. One of the things that was great about EFY when I was doing it is kids would come from all over the nation and come together and learn from each other, right? And then go back out to their own spaces, better, stronger. We call them lighthouses. We all got together, we learned things, and we went and were lighthouses in our own spaces. And
Yeah, so powerful. Thank you so much for sharing that. I just want to acknowledge you, Kylee, for being, I believe, a belonging place personified.
Oh, thank you.
No, seriously, from the time that I met you, it's really clear that you have done a lot to figure out your identity. And that term lighthouse is actually pretty good for describing what you do now. You help other people to recognize and see reflected back at them who they really are and their value and their worth. Yeah. And so I want to thank you for that. And just one final question that I'd love to hear from you. What is a profound experience among your many that has taught you the principle that progress is possible?
Yeah, the one that stood out to me the most when I knew that you were going to ask this question is, I didn't get diagnosed with ADHD until I was 30. And I had struggled with the worst parts of my ADHD up until that point. I didn't know that there was an identifying, not that there has to be, right? I'm not a big fan of everyone has to label, but sometimes having an understood, externalized things really helps you to sort of like figure out how to cope. And so a lot of my learning, I always felt like I was kind of just like getting edges just chipped off. Not like growing, but just chip. It wasn't until I sort of figured out that I had these deficits, and then I was with specific leaders that like saw those problems as outside of me. Does that make sense? So like if you have a water bottle and this is the problem, we're gonna talk about this. We're not gonna talk about this. You're not the problem. This is the problem. That was probably the biggest thing that helped me change and progress, was to be like, if we're talking about this, let's talk about this all day long. Because we're together talking about this. But when people were talking about me, I was the common denominator. I was the problem. I would just cry all the time. I'd go home and I'm like, I can't be a good therapist, and I can't be a this, and I'm losing all my stuff. And when I started to feel like people saw me as also what my strengths were, when they started to like really blow wind in my strengths, one of my love languages is words of affirmation. When they started to key in that was how I would grow. You know, I could live off of words of affirmation over money for a long time in my career. When they could figure that out, we can't give you money, but we can, man, I would thrive, right? So in the combination of let's solve the problems that are external, let's help you grow, and you have all these strengths, then I could do that for myself. I could say, and I started to learn that I had some really big executive function deficits. Well, then what do I do with that? Either I'm a victim of that, or I figure out how to compensate for them. And so I went from being a therapist who couldn't really do the paperwork side of my job, who was always late doing my notes, who was late to meetings, who sort of was really good in session. Everybody said, oh, you're so good. People feel so safe. They feel so seen. But everything outside of the session, I was just mess, right? You can't, that's not a good way to any job, to be like on when you're on, but when you're not on. And I knew that. So eventually I figured out how to find, how to go, how to pay for trainings or whatever to compensate for my deficits. I was able to go from somebody who had really bad executive function to the job I had right before I had now. I was the executive function director over 2 entire programs. At Telos is what it was called. To me, I don't know that there was a better, I don't think we arrived, but if they're in my story of like progress from messy, meaning it really impacted my relationships too, to being seen, to compensating, to then being able to stand in a place to recognize that for people. I think that was so impactful, and I owe that. Some of that work was me. I'm not going to take that away, because I think we do good work, right? But the majority of that work was really good people who blew into my strengths, recognized my weaknesses, separated them from myself, and then we could really focus on how to do that better. And when you turn weaknesses into strengths, and particularly when you turn weaknesses into even better than the average person, there's some kind of empowering magic thing that happens that you say, like, I need to now turn around and gift that back.
Yeah.
I have to gift that back. Where my people that are really good people with ADHD, but are kind of messy, like, how do I gift you executive function skills because it's life-changing? So I think part of progress is figuring out how to do it and making it easier for the next person who does it, right? Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, once you're the pioneer, you've paved the path. You can't be the last one to walk it.
Exactly.
That's
yeah.
beautiful. Thanks for coming and sharing so much and proving to us once again that progress is possible.
Yeah, yeah.
And thank you very much for joining us again
Thanks,
on another
Noah.
episode of the Progress Podcast.